Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the penultimate session today. We're now going to get stuck into one of the biggest topics of discussion, I think, when it comes to AI and its transformations on society over the next year or two, which is the role of AI in the future of work and how it is going to transform the workplace. We know that work is going to change over the next few years in perhaps profound ways. While anxieties about AI disrupting human labor have been a talking point for a good number of years now, I think it's the rise of early technologies like generative AI in the creative industries that are starting to give us a foretaste of really what's at stake, I think, when these technologies become increasingly powerful. We are now at a point where we're starting to talk about the rise of AI agents. We've heard this on a couple of panels and talking sessions today. And these are AI systems that can complete tasks either with or on behalf of their users rather than simply generating outputs. We're also at a point where developers of frontier AI systems, as we've heard at Paris, as we've heard at other events recently, are starting to argue that AI is going to be capable enough to perform most workplace tasks that humans do within a few years. And against that kind of backdrop, it seems that the need to understand how AI is actually going to transform industries and change the nature of work is going to get more acute. So to help us unpack some of this landscape, I'd like you all to help me welcome Sir Christopher Pissarides, Mary Towers, Amy Bird, Professor Jolene Skordis, Professor James Hayton, moderated in a conversation by Anna Thomas. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We are keen to talk to you about making the future work, getting the workplace and workplace AI right. We have a really amazing panel with very diverse perspectives on this issue. And so fresh from Paris and the future of work stream, we're going to focus the conversation on some things that we think are particularly important and that all of our speakers have unusual perspectives on and in many cases new insight, new research that we are keen to share and learn from. So particular themes that we're going to be thinking about are the importance of good innovation and good governance going together, the importance of focusing on human capabilities through the AI and automation process, and perhaps as our overarching theme, our way of tying dots together and joining dots and securing the best possible outcomes, the particular role of good work and good quality jobs through transitions. We're going to start with an overview of our most recent project from Chris Pissarides, and then we're going to go through the panel sharing new insight on this topic, move on to policy directions, and then open it up to the audience. I'm not going to introduce everyone individually, but go straight to Chris for an overview of the Pissarides Review into Work and Wellbeing, which has just been published and is available on our website.
Thank you. Now, we just completed a 3-year project on the future of work and well-being, funded by the Nobel Foundation, I should say. The welfare section, so that we are putting a lot of emphasis on good work and the well-being of everyone participating in work. The idea of the project is that when you get new technologies hitting the economy, and currently, of course, it's AI, then you need to make a transition to a new world of work. Now, if you study economics or if you look at the economics textbooks, they just have one point. They say you're at point A, then you go to point B, finished. This is not how the world works. There are frictions around, as we pointed out, at least I pointed out over a 35-year project before. And what the frictions tell you is that there is a slow adjustment. You may never get there to a world of good jobs, high productivity. You may get to the wrong place. So the objective of our project was to find out what frictions exactly are impeding the development of the economy to a better world with a better technology. And if there is any policy, either at the corporate level, the trade union, or government level, to reduce the impact of those frictions. So what we did is that we divided our work into 3 streams, beginning from bottom up. First, we looked at how workers are responding to the new technologies and what can be done to improve the situation. And of course, the answer there is that you do need to reskill, because workers will be making a lot of transitions. We don't believe there will be unemployment following these technologies. We don't believe AI will take over jobs and not create others, at least not in the foreseeable future. Then we looked at companies, how are companies responding to the new technologies, and we discovered that about 80% of companies are already implementing AI. So we looked at what policies they're following to do it, and it does make a lot of difference what human resource policies are following when you're introducing AI. And finally, we looked at the level of the economy as a whole. Are the different parts of the country ready to receive AI, the automation technologies, including robotics, I should say, and how ready are they, and how much investment is taking place, where we discovered there, it even surprised us, in fact, what a massive difference there is between the wider southeast of kind of London, Oxford, Cambridge triangle, if you like, when it comes to venture capital investments, and combined with the migration of qualified labor in that area, it's like a sort of small world that is acting on its own. And we have made suggestions how to improve the situation elsewhere in the country, starting with major cities like Manchester, Merseyside area, Birmingham, West Midlands, and moving on, Bristol, Newcastle. Newcastle are way behind, actually. Bristol would come next, and so on. I leave it there so that you can hear about the individual streams next.
So thank you very much. So we had this wrap-around perspective looking at macro, meso, or micro, sort of systems, firm, and individual, and how at each level we could identify and overcome barriers to better transitions. And since I've suggested that our overarching theme is good work, is there anything that you wish to say about that, or have I got it wrong?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Well, good work, of course, is absolutely essential, because we know from a new literature, a new area of research in economics, which is sometimes described as happiness research, we know that good work plays a very important role in job and life satisfaction. Now, I mentioned before that we put a lot of emphasis on welfare, that people should feel happy about participating in work, that they feel that is a dignified thing to do, that they are progressing themselves, and so on, and good work is absolutely essential of that. Now, what defines good work? We're discovering more and more that the main feature of good work is transparency, collaborative actions from employers and employees. Treat your employees as your stakeholders. Keep them informed, ask their opinion, because the ultimate objective is to get a good match between the skills and preferences of the worker and the job that they're doing. When you have a good match, you feel that you're making full use of your talents, and there is a satisfaction when you're succeeding in what you're doing. And of course, that benefit transfers onto the employer as well, because you become more productive. You work longer. So that's the objective. How do you achieve that? There are others, but I see you getting impatient with my talking, so I'm going to stop.
I wouldn't describe it as impatient, but it does seem a fantastic opportunity for James to talk about his good work. But for those into theory, Chris's Nobel Prize was in frictions. So what we're talking about is not just getting any old match, but getting a good match through good work, to use my simplifying powers. So Jane, Professor Hayton, could you tell us some insight from your work stream and your firm-level survey about, good governance and innovation in the workplace?
Absolutely. So the work stream that I was responsible for was looking at the organisational level, and we really looked across the whole of the UK economy there were two principal questions, which is what is driving the adoption and what's the extent of adoption actually of AI and other automation technologies, other disruptive technologies. And then what is the impact of that adoption on jobs and work? And so the outcome there is good work that we're interested in, of course. In terms of the adoption, so I think the first thing to say is what we observed was surprising with respect to AI, the automation of cognitive tasks. Because for physical tasks, we've always seen that technology adoption has been dominated by larger firms because of the resources they possess. We did not see that with the adoption of AI. It was spread. There was no effect of firm size on adoption. So firms of all sizes were adopting AI, which obviously has significant implications for workforce outcomes because half of the UK workforce is in SMEs. So that was the first interesting piece. In terms of the adoption, the thing that drives adoption, there are basically three factors for decision makers, which is, do I see there to be a performance advantage from the new technology? Do I understand the technology? How complex is it? And do I see it fitting in, or can my organization adapt to the new technology? And the principal thing that drove those perceptions was actually the way in which human resources are managed in the firm. And what I mean here is the ideas around the technology, the opportunities with technology, your confidence that your workforce can adapt to the technology and their willingness to support that adoption is driven actually by the extent to which you invest in their skills, that you treat them as an asset to be invested in rather than simply a cost. Do you make higher investments in training? Do you involve your workforce in the decisions around technology adoption? Do you consult with the workforce around technology adoption? When you encourage those skills and voice, then you're more likely to have positive perceptions about the technology that leads to its adoption. So the driver there is the management practices leading to the interest in adopting the technology. Then the second part of the question here is, well, so what impact does that have? And in general, we found a net positive effect on jobs of the adoption of AI. But there were differences. And a big driver of those differences was, again, the way in which you manage your employees. So when you took that investment approach, you were more likely to get a positive impact. You would create more jobs. You would create demand for skills. And significantly, the job creation was in the form of good work. So you have more positive outcomes in terms of good work, whereas when you didn't have that investment approach, a high involvement approach to managing people, then you are less likely to see those positive outcomes. And there was a neutral or even a negative effect, which we see on the good work outcomes. You're more likely to substitute than you are to augment with respect to the technology. So those are the principal outcomes of that work.
Yeah, thank you for summarising that. That sounds to me like the business case almost for focusing on good work, perhaps with a particular focus on participation. Is that
I think so. This gets us halfway down the road, and then actually Jolene's findings complement that significantly by looking at the workforce.
Let's go to Jolene next. So overview, firm level, individual level, what did you find?
Well, this was the individual worker level. So this is really the counterpoint to James's findings. We surveyed 5,000 workers across the country. We also did in-depth focus group discussions. So we had mixed methods data. And we find a really fascinating and rather nuanced picture. So for a start, the positivity with which firms viewed technology was definitely replicated in the employees that we interviewed as well. Adopting new technologies, being at the forefront of what is new, is seen as a signal that a firm is competitive, and employees want to work within competitive leading firms. So the principle of AI adoption and the principle of AI integration into their workspaces was viewed positively. Where you then start to get some nuance in what we found is actually in the processes of adoption. So the principle remains, but how then was it was any new technology or AI introduced into their firms, was there this process of voice? Was there an engagement process? When you do have it, with technology like AI, when you have a level of employee engagement, you have workers that have higher levels of well-being as a result, are more engaged with the technology, find novel ways to use the technology within the firm, so might even increase the effectiveness of the technology within their firms. And overall, you have a positive outcome. However, in the absence of that voice, in the absence of that engagement, in the absence of good work, Anna, then you actually have almost the opposite happening. You have increases in anxiety. You don't see the happiness effect that Chris has talked about already. You see workers' well-being decline. And there's always going to be a sort of new adoption anxiety anyway. Anything new is scary. Changes to us human beings always a little bit intimidating. And so, that negative drop in well-being was greater where you didn't have some engagement with employees about the purpose and also some reassurance and some element of trust about what is the function of this AI? Is it going to replace my job? Is it going to make my job easier? Is it going to make my job more interesting? So quality of work and how this technology was going to contribute to it. And so the slide that you're having a look at emphasizes this duality. So yes, voice and the ability of employees to engage with the process of adoption can mean that you can have both positive and negative effects occurring simultaneously with any one technology, but you'll also see that different technologies have different impacts on well-being, and we found that too for job satisfaction and intention to leave. I think the real take-home message that I would have wanted to add to what's already been said is, so without being an economist about it, in game theory there's a strictly dominating strategy or a win-win. Right? And I think good work is a win-win. So when you have good work, when you have employee engagement, you have the opportunity for increased productivity, you can really benefit from the potential that AI could offer the firm. Where you don't, you won't. And so there's this mutually reinforcing, potentially virtuous cycle if we can find ways of ensuring that firms and the enabling structures around them can manifest that level of engagement and good work.
There seems to be, I can't resist asking you, Professor Skordis, on the slide behind us, an interesting difference between the traditional ICTs and the wearables and the AI software, which is our focus today. I just wonder if that's worth pulling out in terms of the assumptions we can make about results.
Yes, of course. Now these aren't what we call time series results. This was a cross-sectional survey. But what we do know about digital ICTs is that's the tech we're all used to. That's Teams, that's the wearable watches, those are the technologies that we are very used to in our day-to-day life. Now, the presumption from these findings is that ultimately we will find ways of incorporating technologies, even very new technologies like AI, into our lives, and we'll find ways of ensuring, because humans kind of always do, that they benefit us to some extent. But those are all technologies that have had time to mature, and we've found ways of ensuring that they work for us and with us instead of against us or instead of us. And so I think with the wearables, the AI software and the robotics, you're looking at much newer technologies that are still going through that adoption and integration process. And we are not passive in that adoption and integration process. We are active agents. And when I say we are all workers here in some sense. So we, as the workforce, we, even as firms, need to think about how we actively participate in moving from the latter three lines where you've got a negative impact on well-being the more you engage with this technology, to the first green one where you have a positive impact on well-being.
So huge potential, but we can't assume it. Must understand those effects. And perhaps that's felt even more sharply with the newest technologies.
We really need to be active agents in this.
This seems like a very good moment to ask Mary Towers from the TUC about her perspective and new insight that you may wish to share on this important topic.
Thank you, Anna. And I'd like to start by saying thank you to the Institute for the Future of Work for inviting the TUC to take part in this discussion. So what I'd like to bring to this is the perspective of trade unions as a democratic vehicle that through our democratic structures can provide insights into the worker experience of technology at work, can also facilitate democratic worker-led innovation, and in addition through collective agreements and collective bargaining, can provide a system of effective and democratic co-governance of technology at work, as well as facilitate the active engagement, worker engagement in the AI value chain that the preceding speakers have touched on so eloquently. So our motions, the TUC represents 48 affiliate trade unions, and between them they represent 5.5 million workers across the UK. And our democratic structure works in such a way that each year we have an annual congress, and our unions send motions to that congress, which are almost like messages from the workplace, if you like, and they act as directions to the trade union movement as to the policy areas that we should focus on in the year to come. And we had a set of motions that were sent to our annual congress in 2019 from a range of different affiliate unions, but those motions focused on algorithmic management and the impact of that on the workforce. Since 2019, there's been a significant development in the motions that have been coming to each annual congress since then. We've had motions on AI in the workplace from a wide group of different unions representing many different sectors of employment. And whereas the initial focus was on algorithmic management, our more recent motions focus on concerns expressed by workers about full automation of their role and how they will transition to new jobs and how that we can ensure that that is a just transition, where workers are equipped with the new skills, technological skills that they need to move on to new roles, but not only that, where workers are empowered with the kind of skills that they need to actively engage and participate in the AI value chain, not just at the point of application in the workplace, but also in terms of the development of technology. And this is something where unions have, again, a unique offering in terms of our structures, our training structures, and the historic relationships that we've built up with workers, creating training programs in the workplace, which could be reignited with new public funding to facilitate the wide-scale AI and digital training that is needed across the country. And then more recently, in terms of our motions, there has also been a focus on the inequality of impact of technology in the workplace. And in particular, we had a motion that came direct from our Young Workers Conference. And in that motion, that they selected out of 20 from their own conference to send to our main conference, and that motion was the motion on AI, they were expressing concerns to us about how the use of technology at work would impact on their ability to develop and learn at work, but also how it would impact on their ability to access employment. So that's just a bit of a snapshot into what we've been hearing from our motions. There's also been a big focus on the impact on creative workers of their work being appropriated for the purposes of training AI and the impact of that on their IP and copyright. But in addition to those motions, also through our democratic structures, through research, through surveys of our members, we've gained insights into their lived experience of technology at work. And that's included things like, for example, unsustainable work intensification, inequality that is caused by discriminatory decision-making, discriminatory algorithmic decision-making, as well as, I stress, inequality of access to, for example, AI-powered training at work. And in addition, problems that are experienced actually hand in hand with employers over actually understanding how the technology is operating, how decisions are being made, important decisions about workers, ranging from the kind of work that they might have access to and how they do that work. And those difficulties in understanding how the technology is operating, but crucially communicating about the technologies, is a really big issue in the workplace. And again, something that trade unions have a long history of working with employers over training, and cementing relationships in the workplace to overcome those kind of communication difficulties. So those are a few insights into the kind of findings that we've made as to the lived experience of technology. Another thread that ran through all of the responses that we got back in terms of the surveys that we issued was a significant lack of consultation of workers. And this again goes to the engagement point. It's absolutely clear amongst our membership that there's such strong support amongst workers for the need for consultation. So we did some polling, and about 70% of workers said that they would support a statutory duty of consultation on employers to actively consult with trade unions and with workers when new technology is being applied in the workplace. And then finally, I just want to touch quickly to give you an insight into how organising and campaigning over an issue over technology in the workplace can result in a scheme and a programme of collaboration where workers are actively involved in the development of technology. So my counterparts in America, AFL-CIO, have examples where in the workplace, for example, in hospitality, an app was being used in the workplace, which was being used as to develop work plans for workers and to direct them to different parts of a site. And they found that they were turning up in a room to clean a room 2 at a time, whereas only 1 person was needed. Or, for example, women were being sent to the far side of the site at night time in unsafe conditions, whereas when the work was human-led, they had ensured that they were working in teams, that their work pattern made sense according to how much energy they had at different points in the day, so that they wouldn't end up with a huge space to clean at the end of the day, for example. There are problems over this technology. They involved the union. It resulted in the union, the workers, and the technologists collaborating to improve the technology, working hand in hand to come up with something that actually worked for workers. And there is now a programme of work going on in collaboration between trade unionists and academics at Carnegie Mellon University, where again they've got concrete examples in both hospitality and transport of worker-led innovation through collaborative projects that's resulted in technology that works for everyone.
Thank you.
So I hope that's given some insights into how our democratic structures can work, not just in facilitating consultation, but also in facilitating constructive collaboration and innovation.
It sounds very similar, in fact, to what Professor Hayton was saying, that participation is not only a way of surfacing new information, but opening up new forms of innovation through the process of technology adoption, which is a point that perhaps is often missed. But thank you for making the important point that unions are, in a sense, they're more than this, of course, but a ready-made infrastructure for thinking about and resolving some of these threads, seeking better information, engaging the workforce, training, communicating. That seems like a good moment to give Amy the floor and think about perhaps we could move towards thinking about regulation and policy and how much of this is covered at the moment and where perhaps the gaps might be.
Thank you. So in terms of picking up on that thread from Mary then, in terms of the infrastructure of giving workers the ability to engage in this, I'm going to hark over to what's happening in Paris at the moment at the AI Summit, because really importantly there we see the EU AI Act, which gives a really strong framework for dealing with some sorts of issues. So the way that we get to good work is that sense of being engaged. What people need for that engagement is a sense of trust. And so the way that the EU AI Act has approached this is this sense of actually being a trustworthy AI and human-centric AI. And what that Act does is it sets out some high-level principles about AI use, but it also sets out some prohibitions. A big prohibition that came in very recently was in relation to the use of emotion recognition in the workplace, really key for building up that trust, the bad of AI that people might feel frightened about. It also sets out various prohibitions for the use of AI in the workplace. So, for example, AI use in decision-making for HR decisions, very strict frameworks around that to build up the trust that people would have within it. So there's this whole framework there when people feel safe to engage with it, safe to then innovate, safe to bring their operational efficiencies into their workplace. There is also in Europe, what is interesting to pick up on Mary's points, probably more of a framework for that collective worker engagement in respect of AI. So whether or not that is actually under the EU AI Act and bringing information to bear through that, or rather actually having the collective engagement with works councils, which are much more established, for example, in France and Germany and the Netherlands, or in a more deliberate and sophisticated way, having co-determination rights with workers, whereby a formal conciliatory body would be brought in to really think about some of the more complicated aspects, for example, in relation to safety or surveillance. So there's a kind of collective framework there. A difference in the UK, though, is that we don't actually necessarily have that structured framework within our legislation the same way. So there isn't the piece around the works councils in the workplace that we'd have in Europe. So there need to be other ways for getting that worker engagement. There are some quite precise ways that that's done in the UK or required in the UK. So, for example, if there's anything in relation to health and safety coming out of AI usage, that might be where there'd be an obligation to engage. But rather than what employers are faced with having to do is think, okay, how in our organisation, how are we going to use governance and framework? How are we constrained by existing legal structures? Employers know that they can't discriminate. They know, therefore, that when they're using AI, that shouldn't bring bias inappropriately into the workplace. They know they have specific duties in relation to health and safety. And so they build that into their policies and their frameworks and their use of AI. But then also thinking, okay, but how do we make our employees know that that's the case? And how are we actually going to establish in our codes of conduct, in the policies that we're disseminating in the workforce, people have that trust? They can then think, okay, my organisation is focused on eliminating the bad side of things. How are we going to bring in the good? How am I going to engage in my workplace through, for example, a structured approach of a union? Or example might be of having a tech hub in the workplace. I know that's something we've done at Clifford very successfully. Or it might be through having individual steering committees flowing up to senior management to really bring out the ideas of how operational efficiencies can be drawn out, how they can build up prompts for AI use in their individual roles. There's so much when they've got that safety framework from the legislation. There are gaps in the UK, but we have existing guidance from the ICO, we have the existing data protection framework. So we have a patchwork, but it's really reliant on individual employers to navigate that, to get that good work for their employees.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Before we open it up to the floor, I'm tempted to ask a question to you, perhaps particularly Amy, but everybody. It does seem as if there's a bit of a hodgepodge globally and nationally in this area with data law, health and safety law, equality law, and so on. We do have some advantages in the UK, including our principles-based approach, and we're actually very good at regulation and governance as well as innovation. Do you think, rather than seeing regulation as something that's always complex and difficult, if it was done smartly and simply, do you see any merit in an overarching, simplifying framework, embedding the principles and really just aimed at getting responsible actors to anticipate and do their bit to think about the good and the bad, as Jolene has said, and set up a process for monitoring and response, as you all have said in different ways, as a way of coping with what we know and eliciting information about what we may not know yet, but being ready to respond to it in the best possible way.
Yeah, so look, regulation is getting a slightly bad press at the moment. We all know kind of where things are going globally, but it does provide that framework. And I think having an overarching set of principles, whether you're taking a principle-based approach in the way that is through our hodgepodge in the UK, or if we're actually setting out a legislative framework, it gives people a direction, it gives people a touch point of where they ought to be. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily in the UK that we do need that fresh regulation, because a lot of global employers will already be thinking, well, look, hold on, we've got the EU AI Act, we've got different bits and pieces that we're having in the States. We don't want another piece of regulation which is going to fit into that. We're all going to have a global best practice approach. But there'll be others who think, actually, well, no, we do need something which is overarching. Whichever way you do it, you need to have some kind of framework. So if there's not going to be something which is in place at a kind of single unified point, where I can really see the benefit of that, it's really going to be thinking, okay, how are we, maybe as a global organisation, as an SME, going to draw out from what we've got from those principles and have something that works in our workplace. And that's where we help, trying to navigate people to get to that place.
whatever we do, we're going to need support for SMEs in their process of technology adoption in this country and beyond it. Opening up the floor. Who would like to put a question to this wonderful panel? I can see 2 hands already. Shall I do...
Thank you so much for the session. My question is regarding the responsible AI practitioner. We saw in the AI opportunities plan for kind of upskilling pipeline of talent. These folks that hold the responsible AI lead, the chief ethics officers, come from a very varied background, making it really multidisciplinary. Curious on how you might see this space formalize or professionalize in the coming years. Thank you.
Should we take the other?
Hello. That was all very interesting. On a more pointy and practical level, let's take private equity as an example, right? Private equity is increasingly in ownership of a significant proportion of UK businesses, and that is only set to grow. Many of those businesses are, infrastructural, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Private equity, as we all know, is interested in maximizing profit, mainly by cutting costs as hard as possible, as quickly as possible. What are we going to do to stop private equity deciding to replace all the people who are expensive and the offices that they're not going to need because they don't have any people anymore with AI that cost fuck all?
Shall I start with the end one, Anna?
I was looking for a volunteer.
Go on then, I'll take private equity. There's no magic wand to any of this. The transition, a transition is coming regardless. But I'm not sure that the incentive structures are exactly the way that you describe. I don't think it's all replacement of workers by machines. Certainly our evidence is actually pointing to the idea that technology is augmenting work rather than replacing work. Now, that doesn't mean that work remains good and satisfying. Work can become monitored and boring as hell. But it's not that jobs are being sloughed off. So I think we need to get away from the sort of binary vision that it's us versus the machines. And I want to get back to the point that I kind of glibly described as win-win, because actually when you get the technology working effectively and augmenting the workforce, and you get it working for the maximization of efficiency or output or productivity or innovation or creativity even, then you're actually maximizing your profits. So cost cutting, yes, but private equity also wants profit maximization. So cost cutting is just one of those vehicles. So I think we aren't all necessarily in a boxing ring together. I think there are some aligned incentives that may keep some of your concerns in check. Not all of them.
I think just to pick up on that point, I think that the growth and investment and the value creation from the PE houses, I think is actually really valuable in this.
Yeah.
Because they've got that ability to do that, but also very focused on human capital management as well. So I think, we're all in this innovating together, and I think we have a government that seems to be, relatively well now on the side of innovation. Yeah. But I think also the PE house is going to be an important part of that as well.
Okay, that's an interesting additional consideration. Sorry, we've skipped to the second question rather than the first, because the first wasn't really in the field, but...
I've got a little more to say on the second.
Great.
That's okay, just
but we mustn't forget the first.
We could split it between
a quick recap.
But I just want to make a quick point about the importance of collectivism and about how unions provide a very important counterbalance in terms of power and influence over the direction that technology takes in society. And aside from the state and government, trade unions are one of the few remaining sources of collective and democratic power and influence. And so I guess my one-word answer to the question would be unionise, because if we unionise and stand together, and this applies like a point that I was sort of making to colleagues in our sort of pre-discussion was that managers, for example, are workers. Business leaders are workers. Trade unions have open membership to all workers. And this is a really important sort of moment in the trajectory of whether or not technology is going to be used to needlessly decimate livelihoods and fully automate roles, or whether it's going to be used for the betterment of work and the world of work for all. Trade unions have a really vital role to play in that, and also in ensuring that research and development at research and development level, that is led not only by commercial interests but also by other interests, and that trade unions, it's all about representation, that trade unions can provide representation both in the workplace but also at industrial strategy making level.
Moving forward, backwards towards the first question, what role would standards and best practice, perhaps by professional bodies, play to complement and support the development of smart regulation?
I was going to go in a different direction in my answer.
Feel free.
So, because I think this is a fascinating idea. The responsible AI practitioner is not obviously a purely technological role. And I think we need to look back over decades, actually. We're at a moment where we have a very conscious approach to technology adoption, more perhaps than we've ever had before, because of our great worries about the displacement of the workforce. Responsible AI adoption will need to take a socio-technical perspective, and so the practitioners will need to understand work and work organization and the community, the collective, actually, within which the work occurs, in order to maximize the positive benefits of the technology and minimize the harms. So I think I see that kind of a role as sitting right at that nexus between the social and the technical. Where you position that in an organization is a very interesting question. I'd be leery of sort of leaving that to HR.
And maybe, James, that is not intended entirely to be positioned within an organisation. Maybe if there's a plug for trade unions, there's also a plug for higher education and universities. And some of the things we've talked about in previous conversations have been the role for multidisciplinary upskilling. So the idea that AI practitioners, so technologies and technology developers, shouldn't come out of computer programming, coding only schools of education, but should in fact understand the psychological dimensions of interaction, should also have an underpinning about community socialization and what the role of technology will be within a social and community context.
So zooming up or out to macro again, Chris, this conversation reminds me of one of the analyses that was done combining the survey results with indicators from the disruption index to see what socio and technical infrastructure was needed to support the sort of best technology adoption at a firm level. Thank you. That's very timely.
What you see the slide refers to it. It's what is needed to make sure that we're adopting AI in the best possible way, both for companies and the workers, is to improve the readiness of companies outside, the readiness of areas outside the Southeast, and that needs a good education, background education up to school level. I don't think A-level training is the best. In fact, I think it's one of the worst that you can give after age 16 to specialize in 3 subjects. I mean, it's terrible, but I don't see us moving on to the international baccalaureate very soon. And then we need skilling, training, including lifelong learning. Now, we know that British governments, I think since the 1960s probably, they've tried to implement a good skills policy, and they failed. I sat on a committee myself about 3 or 4 years ago. It was obvious that there was no consistent plan about skills. What do we need? How do we go about getting it? In fact, I resigned after a year because I realized it wasn't going anywhere. and that's absolutely necessary. What skilled workers we have now, they move to the southeast, most of them, anyway, so they starve the other areas from it. I would call that the main one. Now, there's also an aspect that we didn't talk about at all. In fact, it refers to the second question up there. I mean, every country, the advanced industrial countries that's implemented AI, including Britain, has a shortage of labor, not a shortage of jobs. If it was true that employers are using AI to replace workers, you get a shortage of jobs, you get unemployment. In fact, unemployment is at an all-time low. Even in Italy, it's falling, as far as I know. I saw recently a survey by German employers. 75% of them say that they cannot help the German economy recover because they cannot find skilled labor. And the most serious problems about the aging population, they're still to come. They'll be coming between 2030 and 2050. Merkel tried to use immigration to offset this aging of the population. It was a complete failure as a policy. There were riots in the streets against. And the way it's going, you must have seen the demonstrations by the government yesterday how to stop immigration. There's no way we can get immigration to correct this demographic imbalance that we're heading for. So I think we should have a policy where we use AI and robotics to replace boring jobs. It's been done in manufacturing. It has been done in manufacturing. I mean, it's only 8% of workers going to manufacturing.
We are unfortunately out of time, but it's a good note to end on, to remind us that we must use AI to replace
replace the boring tasks and focus on the more creative ones in the data analytics.
Identify the negative things and address them, and focus on the good bits and the human capabilities over
I'll tell you next time.
technologies ones. More next time. Thank you very much for having us.